Hello there everybody, what's this, eh? A fortnightly podcast about video games? Why yes, it is! You're listening to Off the Rails, and I'm your host, the offrailgamer. Okay, settle down please, we've got a lot to get through, and we'll only have to stay after the bell if we don't focus now. God, imagine if this podcast was really like that. I hope you don't actually see me as some stuffy old professor type. We're all just here to have a good time, right? If you have come here in search of a dry lecture on electronic entertainment systems, I fear I may be about to disappoint. Far from being some kind of expert, or scholar surrounded by dusty old books on the subject, I am merely a video games enthusiast. A hobbyist, if you will. But before I start dictating my complete autobiography to you, I should try and get back on track and actually introduce the podcast properly. This is episode 9 of the Off the Rails podcast, which I release on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts every other Thursday. Since the last episode aired, I have a new development to announce. Last time out, I told you that I didn't have a regular time at which I post. However, I am now scheduling my podcasts, so going forwards, new podcast episodes should be going live at 6 PM UK time every second Thursday. If you have any thoughts on this schedule, or would like to request a different upload time, do drop me a note and I will try to take it into consideration. For example, you may listen while you're working, and would therefore prefer a morning upload. If you look to the podcast description, you'll find the relevant contact information, but maybe shoot me a quick message to offrailgamer@gmail.com, and I'll try to accommodate requests as long as they're reasonable and persuasive. That's persuasive, not coercive, mind. Let's keep things civil between us. But besides admin and logistics, please feel free to get in touch with comments and feedback on these podcasts, and my other content put out on different platforms. If there's a game or a broader topic around gaming that you'd like me to cover, let me know and I'll do my best to schedule it in at some point. What other platforms am I on? Well, if you look to the podcast description again, you'll find that I posted links to my YouTube, Twitter, Twitch and TikTok. I think that's everything. Every week I confess that I'm not verified anywhere, but the links I posted are legit and will bring you to my various channels. I'm still not going live with any regularity anywhere at the moment, but if you're at all interested, you can drop me a cheeky little follow on TikTok and Twitch and turn on notifications. Then you should at least be told when I go live. Alternatively, you might only be interested in my high quality edited content and live streams don't appeal to you. And that's okay. I'm just trying to appeal to possible different preferences and let you know what's on offer. Now, without further ado, let's not get too bogged down in all this detail, and instead, let's turn our attention to the first segment of the podcast, and I'll tell you what I've been playing recently. Well, since the last podcast aired, I uploaded a video to YouTube in which I played Woody Woodpecker Racing on the PS1. You may recall from last time that I'd mentioned this was a recent pickup, and I was really looking forward to giving it a try. It's unfortunate then that I'm not so much looking forward to giving it a second chance. The game's not broken by any means, but I get the distinct impression that it was never playtested before its release. Otherwise, the developers might have realised that they'd not just programmed the AI to provide a challenge, but instead made them unbeatable by programming them to genuinely be faster than the player, no matter who you choose to race as. So maybe you need to make good use of the weapons crates to get one over on them. Yeah, I had thought of that, but with their speed advantage, the NPCs even hog all of these before you have the chance to reach them, so all in all, I stand by what I said at the end of the episode when I called this game cheap. I will give it a second chance at some point, just in case I missed a trick, but it's going to have to do something really grand to make up for how bad it was the first time out. I mean, if you're trying to design a Dark Souls of racing games, would you really make it Woody Woodpecker themed? Next on the channel, I decided to have a look at a new acquisition in the form of Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, in an effort to show how a kart racing game should be done. As I've said previously, I used to play a fair bit of CTR with one of my mates when I was younger, but never actually owned a copy myself. I finally capitulated and picked this up as part of the PlayStation Summer Sale, bundled with the Spyro Reignited trilogy, another series of games I've never played before, but I understand that these are actually good, so I'm really looking forward to checking them out. In Red Dead, only because I've played through so many times, and very recently completed a full playthrough, I decided to put on some cheats, primarily so I could get my hands on the small game arrows in order to attain a perfect snake skin to take to the trapper and get Arthur kitted out with my favourite hat in the game. Beyond that, Jack's been kidnapped, so we burnt the Braithwaites in their stupid home, and now we have to go and find Angelo Bronte in Saint Denis. A couple of other games I've been playing are Mudrunners and Monster Truck Championship. Mudrunners is a really slow-paced game in which you drive large trucks through, well, the mud, if you hadn't guessed already. It's good fun to play, but won't be going up on the channel anytime soon, as it really doesn't offer much of a spectacle to anyone just watching. Monster Truck Championship, on the other hand, may well go up at some point, maybe once I've had some more practice. Besides which, I don't want to put up 3 motorsport videos in as many weeks. This one is awesome though, with events varying between racing, drag racing, and of course causing destruction by tearing through caravans and portaloos and running over old cars. I've been quite a busy lad in the last 2 weeks, picking up AEW Fight Forever as well. This is a really fun game, and in my opinion better than WWE 2K18 or 2K22, which are the last 2 wrestling games I played. The only issue is, there's not an awful lot to do, particularly once you've completed the Road to Elite career mode. Hopefully if we get a second game they'll stick in something akin to Universe mode in the WWE games, and we could also do with a more extensive roster, including Angelico, the Butcher and the Blade, Colt Cabana, and well, quite a few others actually. I don't know how many will be added on as DLC, but more would definitely be appreciated in Casa de Offrail, that's for sure. And lastly for this segment, I've gone back to Ratchet & Clank, and I don't think that I'm far off completing it either, which means I should be looking to Rift Apart next. Now here's something for you, a new segment before we get into our dose of gaming news. It's good for you, don't complain. Anyway, before I force some news down your throats, I've received communication from a listener, so now's for a new segment I'm calling Listener's Whispers. And our first ever correspondence comes in from Lawrence in South Shields. In fact, no location has actually been given, and even if it had, I wouldn't be declaring it online because your safety online is as important to me as my own. Dear offrailgamer, seeing your Overboard video reminded me what a charming game it is. Those cannons are feather touches compared to the saws. Been enjoying the podcast format a lot, not a lot, as I learnt recently that is not correct spelling. Both the excitable and dry episodes. For helicopter winching action, you may like to try Jungle Strike. Being a fan of toy soldiers, I was truly hooked. That was a natural turn of phrase, I promise. As a child, balancing frenetic shooting explosions with precise pickups. I do wonder how many children growing up thought the game was based on true events rather than inspired by real-world conflicts. Luckily, I was only concerned with not running out of fuel, rather than geopolitics. Newsround was a boring show, wasn't it? I didn't know there was a Judge Dredd shooter. The cutscenes look enjoyably budget, but the rest of the game looks unenjoyably budget though. For a superior Dredd experience, I would turn your eyes to Dredd vs. Death, a faithful rendition of the franchise. So, no Stallone, sadly. Thanks, and bye! Lawrence. Well, thank you, Lawrence, for that lovely letter what you sent in. It really is great to hear from you, and I'm glad you've been enjoying Off the Rails so far. Reading your note, I felt like you'd captured my delivery style so perfectly, I wonder if other listeners will think I'd just written to myself in an effort to encourage them to write in too. But that's not the case. This is a genuine correspondence I've received, just as I'd scheduled the last episode to air, so I've been hanging on to this for the last 2 weeks to include today. Lawrence's mention of Jungle Strike is in reference, I believe, to my slating of Air Ranger Helicopter Rescue, back in episode 7. I'm a big fan of the Strike games, having grown up playing Soviet Strike on PS1, and since adding PS1's Nuclear Strike to my collection, along with Jungle, Desert and Urban Strike on the Mega Drive, or Genesis, in North America, of course. I must confess, I need to spend more time with the Mega Drive trilogy, but am I correct in thinking that Jungle Strike starts in Washington DC, around the White House, before sending you overseas on campaign? I also agree that Newsround was a boring show. I also had no time for Blue Peter as a kid and primarily watched CITV after school as a result. I remember Art Attack was on Mondays, How To on Tuesdays, and of course we finished the week with Funhouse. There was also Zap, the Hurricanes, Mike and Angelo, Woof, and Budgie the Little Helicopter, to name just a few other favourites from my very early years. Hold on, you've derailed me a bit there, Lawrence. I could talk for hours on mid-90s kids TV, if I didn't catch myself, but let's try and stay on the subject of BGs, can we? I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of Dread vs. Death before, so I'll surely be scouring eBay to see if I can find a copy of a reasonable price. So thanks for the suggestion. And if you want to be like Lawrence and get your message featured in the next Listener's Whispers, all you need to do is write me at offrailgamer@gmail.com and keep it family friendly. You'll find the address is in the podcast description. After that, who wants some gaming news? I do! And first, can we just breathe a quick sigh of relief? I haven't spotted any more games announcements for October, though I have had my eyes clenched shut the last 2 weeks, mind. Maybe all those game studios and developers have taken pity and decided to give our poor wallets a little break. Next, though, is some news to counter this for us. I found the Assassin's Creed tweet linked in the episode description well over a week ago now, but thought that you, my dear listeners, may have missed it, so I figured I'd include it here for you to hear from me now. And I quote, "Assassin's Creed Mirage has gone gold and is coming out a week early." The tweet goes on to read, "Your journey now starts on October 5th of October. Only will it though? Personally, I've already got my pre-orders in for Cities Skylines 2, releasing on October 24, Star Trek Resurgence, releasing October 7, and, oh dear, The Grinch Christmas Adventure, releasing October 14, although I won't actually be playing this until December, or late November at the earliest. I am looking forward to Mirage though, as I really like the Assassin's Creed games, but I really don't think I can afford to get another game just at the moment, so it might be one that just has to wait for the time being. We'll see, I guess. And don't get me started on Spider-Man 2, which I'm also looking forward to, but definitely not for its £70 price tag, which is scheduled for release October 20. That's going to be one that's going to have to significantly drop in price or get added to PS Plus before I'll be playing it. I mean, the Spider-Man games are only ever set in the same map, and they're not particularly long, with each of the last 2 games coming in under 20 hours, I think. Now, I'm not one to say that every game has to be a 60-plus hour marathon, and if my last podcast on Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons tells us anything, it's that some shorter games can really earn a special place in my heart. But come on! If you're going to be asking £70, you really need to be making sure your game delivers. And it might, but I'm left feeling particularly sceptical after playing through Miles Morales, which wasn't long enough to be considered much more than a DLC for the first game, if I'm honest. And I guess that's my gaming news for this week. Everything seems to be just around the corner. Let's hope all these new games deliver. At least if the start of 2024 is quiet, we should still have plenty to be catching up with from the autumn. Now on with the show! Let's get to the main event. I've noticed a bit of a trend on the old TikTok recently, in that a lot of people have been playing the PS1 Tomb Raider games, and so it is that I intend to jump on the bandwagon and look back at those iconic games that captured the hearts and minds of so many gamers in the 90s. Or end of the last century, as many youngsters like to say in order to provoke an existential crisis in any millennial they encounter. That's actually one trend that I find quite amusing though. Luckily, I took on board what Papa Smurf taught us when he sang, "You're only as old as you think you are, if you think at all. If you act as young as you think you are, you'll feel 10 feet tall." No more singing, thank you. Hold it. You thought you had me, didn't you? Well, you'll have to get up a good deal earlier in the morning to catch me out and fully derail the podcast. We covered some of the telly programmes I grew up with in the Listener's Whispers segment anyway, so if you don't mind, we'll turn our attention to that most strangely hypnotising of polygonal shapes, Lara Croft. To this day, of the original trilogy of games, I've only owned Tomb Raider 2, and this absolute classic remains in my collection. Therefore, I'm sure you can appreciate that this is the game I have the most to talk about. But that's not to say that I'm completely ignorant in respect of the other two games, as a couple of my childhood friends owned each of them respectively. That, and I've watched playthroughs online to scratch that nostalgic itch and show me what I'm missing out on. But let's begin by speaking more generally, shall we? As I think it's best to acknowledge what it was that made these games stand out and appeal to so many. And by the way, although no discussion on the topic is complete without its mention, when I talk of what was so appealing about these games, I'm not referring to the rumours that you could get to see Lara in the nip by having her swim anti-clockwise around the pool at her home 3 times. That said, such rumours were undoubtedly fuelled by her saying, "Now I'd better take off these wet clothes," as she climbed out. Anyway, with that seedy little matter covered, maybe we can drag our minds back out of the gutter for 10 minutes and talk about some of the game's other qualities. We'll stay at Lara's mansion another minute or two though, as there's another matter that cannot go without mention. Say it with me now. Locking the butler in the fridge! Yes, of course, we all did it. But for my part, it wasn't merely out of spite or mindless curiosity. I genuinely hated the sense of being followed, and that little rattle of china on the tea tray he carried about proved more tense than I could bear. Therefore, the first thing to be done was to jog alongside the first half of the obstacle course, let myself into the house through the kitchen door, and then go and stand in the walk-in chiller until the doddery old git came to join me. A quick backflip over his head and a step to the left and... "Let's do the time warp again." Or rather, get that door shut and run away. I jest not when I tell you that butler had a far greater effect on my anxiety than any other level in the game, and that includes the jump scares of a first-time playthrough. What made the Tomb Raider games so great, in my opinion, was that they were the closest thing we'd had at the time to getting to play in an Indiana Jones movie. Sure, there had been games that had come before, which had had us exploring dungeons and caves. Titles such as Pitfall and Prince of Persia had delivered on some of the environmental elements, I suppose. But Tomb Raider gave us 3D settings and IJ-style booby traps, even right down to the rolling boulders. Have they stood the test of time, though? Well, those tank controls were pain-inducing at the time and will probably stand in the way of many modern gamers breaking into them. And some people will probably try to ridicule the graphics, or say only that it looked good for the time. But you know what? I think these games absolutely do hold up. I mean, sure, they're no Red Dead 2 in terms of graphics, but it's not like you have to squint or really use your imagination to guess what everything is. The Tomb Raider series of games have always bridged the gap between the semi-realistic, or believable at least, and the outright supernatural. Again, this screams Indiana Jones with artifacts such as the Ark of the Covenant, or that psycho voodoo guy in Temple of Doom pulling people's hearts out of their chests. In the first Tomb Raider, You face down packs of wolves, or bats, people, and other perfectly ordinary adversaries, but you also get into an altercation with a Tyrannosaurus Rex! Has Dr. Hammond been lurking around here recently? Before I get on to the game that I'm most familiar with from the series, allow me, if you will, to skip ahead to Tomb Raider 3 briefly. All I really wanted to mention here is that the game takes Lara to 3 locations, South Pacific, London, and Nevada, which the player can choose to visit in any order. Unfortunately, I don't know a great deal more about this particular title, so with your permission I'll turn now to TR2. Or without your permission even. I've recorded this in the past, before you're listening now, so it's a bit late to get so argumentative really. You could have said something sooner. Tomb Raider 2 opens with a video of a great dragon stomping over villages and burning people and crops alike with its magical fire breath. Just like Brian Boitano, if I've learned anything from South Park. Anyway, one civilian finds himself underneath the dragon's belly and spots something protruding from its scales. He reaches up and draws a mystical dagger, which results in the death of the dragon. Later, 2 men secure the dagger away so that it might never again summon such a creature. The next thing we see is action girl Lara Croft abseiling out of a helicopter that is hovering somewhere over the Great Wall of China. This gives us our starting playable level and throws us straight in at the deep end, as no sooner have we taken our first few steps than a tiger comes running at us, hungry for a tasty meal. Luckily, Lara's packing heat and can make short work of this predator with her dual-wielded pistols. I'm not going to go into great detail about each level, don't worry. After all, you could look up a walkthrough online for that. But we'll go over some of the most exciting bits of gameplay and key storyline elements. The Great Wall, besides being an iconic landmark in real life, really sets up the rest of the game, with ancient booby traps set to release that giant boulder, very reminiscent of the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as spike pits hidden under unstable floor tiles, and mechanisms hidden in the walls that fire deadly crossbow bolts across the room. Make it past all of these and you'll be rewarded with a ride on a zip line. Just like a day out with Go Ape. This triggers a cutscene where Lara meets a member of a strange Italian cult, who tells her that cult leader Marco Bartoli is obsessed with the dagger of Xian. Xian? What, that little knife sticking out of the dragon's belly in the opening cinematic? The bearer of the blade, it turns out, can turn oneself into a dragon by plunging the forged steel into their own chest. We don't really want dragons running around the place. Lara certainly doesn't want that at least, so she gets herself on the next flight to Venice and tracks the Flaminera cult down to an abandoned opera house. Needless to say that in the meantime she runs into plenty of cultists unknowingly ready to meet their untimely demise at the business end of Lara's guns. By which I mean her hand cannons, not her biceps. Venice happens to be one of my favourite levels in the game, with plenty to explore and some other neat puzzles to solve, altering the depths of different watercourses and opening and closing gates to allow passage in the speedboat Lara's borrowed. In the opera house, Lara almost catches up to Bartoli as he's boarding a plane. She has just enough time to stow away on board. Next destination, the sunken wreck of the Maria Doria, where a seraph that's key to retrieving the dagger is thought to be located. Only first we'll be making a short diversionary stop, as Lara's not so great at hide and seek and her presence has been detected. Time for everyone's favourite part in any game that does this. Lose all your gear! That's right, Lara gets stripped of her personal arsenal and locked up in a cage on an oil rig. It only gets worse as well, because once you make it out of the rig, Lara finds herself in deep water. Literally. The next sequence really ups the anxiety as you desperately swim towards the aforementioned shipwreck before Lara runs out of breath, or runs into a nasty shark. Lara finds the seraph and commandeers a plane set for Tibet and the Barkang monastery where the dagger has been sealed up. The plane goes down somewhere in the mountains, but luckily someone's left these snowmobiles here. This next sequence was another favourite of mine as you race through the snowy mountains and icy caves towards the monastery. Being in Tibet, you'll encounter Yeti in this area. But, interestingly, as long as you leave the monks alone, they'll leave you alone, and will even fight on your side if they're close by when a cultist starts kicking off. Finally, not everyone is trying to kill us. Unfortunately though, while you've been somewhat preoccupied, Bartoli has got his hands on the dagger and stabbed himself in the chest. Lara sheds a single tear for him and heads on back to Blighty. Wait, no she doesn't! She dukes it out with Bartoli's lizard form and grabs that dagger out of his undercarriage. Bye-bye, Barty! The world saved, Lara does finally return home, where she is ambushed by some irate Italians furious over the death of their leader. Have they learned nothing? Lara soon sends them to join him in the next life, and all while wearing a formal gown as well. And that's just about all the time we have for this episode. Join me this Saturday over on YouTube, and if you're minded to, do write in at offrailgamer@gmail.com, and next time I could be reading your innermost thoughts in the next Listener's Whispers. Other than that, I hope you'll be back in 2 weeks' time for episode 10 of Off the Rails. Until then, bye!